I am dreaming of the mountains of my home, wrote an American songwriter, of the mountains where in childhood I would roam. I have dwelt 'neath southern skies where the summer never dies, but my heart is in the mountains of my home.
There you go. Beautiful.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another in our series of programs and lectures and webinars from the James Madison Program in American Ideals and Institutions here at Princeton University. I'm Alan Gelso, Director of the Madison Program's Initiative on Politics and Statesmanship, and the program's Thomas W. Smith Research Scholar. And this afternoon's program is unquestionably one of the most unusual we have ever hosted. Mountain Memories, Stories of Our Appalachian Boyhoods. It is the tale of two boys from the mountains of West Virginia named Robbie and Skip. One played football, the other played the banjo. One of them went to Yale and thence to Cambridge, the other to Swarthmore and thence to Oxford. They became world-famous academics. Robert P. George, the McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence at Princeton and Director of the Madison Program, and Henry Louis Gates, the Alphonse Fletcher University Professor at Harvard and Director of the Hutchins Center for African and African American Research. They have been on television. They have been in movies. They have been in documentaries. Their portraits have been painted and exhibited. But I can say that I have known both of them for over 25 years, participated in programs with both of them, revere both of them. I'm now a part of the Madison Program, but I have also been a non-resident fellow with the W.E.B. Du Bois Institute at the Hutchins Center. The one of them is my boss. The other I simply address as boss.
It's true, he does.
But best of all, they grew up only 72 miles from each other, one in Piedmont, West Virginia, and the other in Morgantown, West Virginia. They need no more introduction from me. You know them both. Let them take you to where they both began. Mountain Memories, Stories of Our Appalachian Boyhoods.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you.
That was brilliant. Thank you so very much. Skipper Dipper Ripper, I don't know how we got here, but here we are.
Here we are, buddy. Here we are.
I want to share with the audience a bit of the background to how we got here, and I am just so overwhelmingly delighted to be able to welcome to Princeton my very, very distinguished eminent friend, Professor Henry Louis Gates, Jr. This began just as COVID was on the horizon. On Thursday, November 14th of 2019, I received out of the blue the following email message. Dear Robert, I was watching the dialogue between Cornell and you on YouTube today and almost fell off my chair when you said you were from West Virginia. I'd love to hear more about that. If you would send me your best mailing address, I'd send you two of my books, one about growing up in the Eastern Panhandle and the other about Reconstruction and Redemption. I shall always be a loyal West Virginian. 3 sets of my 4th great-grandparents, two set free by the Revolution and the third set free in 1823, all lived in Hardee County, about 30 miles from Piedmont, where I grew up. So I have deep roots in those hills. Best wishes, Skip. To which I responded 23 seconds later with, Dear Skip, thanks for your lovely note. I'm delighted to hear from you. Yes, I am indeed a genuine bona fide fellow mountaineer. And like you, I shall always be a loyal West Virginian. Montani semper liberi.
That's right.
The state's motto, mountaineers always
free.
As evidence of my hillbilly authenticity, I offer the attached photograph taken in Cambrabo State Forest near Elkins I'm the lad in the bib overalls holding the fishing rod. The younger boys are brothers of mine. The older ones are friends. And here's some additional evidence. And there I supplied the link to that banjo performance that was just shown on the screen. I'll paste below this note. Now get this, folks. I'll paste below this note a fan letter that I sent to you back in 2011 after reading your wonderful memoir, Colored People. It probably never found its way to you. The address to which I directed it is not the one from which you wrote to me. Anyway, it provides a bit of information about my own West Virginia background and experiences. It would be lovely to get together sometime to compare notes about growing up in the hills. And that's exactly what we're doing today. Now, I want to read you just a bit before we turn to our conversation of that note, that fan letter that I wrote to Professor Gates in 2011. Dear Professor Gates, I'm writing to say how very much I enjoyed and admired your memoir, Colored People. I read it when it was assigned to my son in his high school American Studies course. I'm so glad I did. I'm just a few years younger than you are. I was born in 1955. But your book beautifully and quite movingly evoked the culture I recall as a kid growing up in West Virginia. We were quite self-consciously, my family, we were quite self-consciously foreign people. That's how my parents described us, distinguishing us and our customs and mores from the folks that they, my parents, referred to as the American people. My grandfathers were immigrant coal miners, one from Italy, the other from Syria. So we were sort of like our neighbors, but sort of not. I played bluegrass banjo and hunted and fished, but we were still somehow different. We were in some sense part of the larger culture, but also part of the smaller community of foreign people. It made life really interesting, and I look back on my growing up very fondly. Anyway, this is really just a fan letter. I love the book and have shared it with my 4 brothers and others in my family. Obviously, our experience wasn't just like yours, but the parallels were striking. At point after point, your recollections and marvelous descriptions of people, places, and events revived for me long dormant memories. Best wishes, Robert George.
Oh, what a beautiful letter. Thank you. You're going to give that to me, right? No, I never received that.
Yeah, and the next.
I would have framed that letter.
I don't use that email address. I haven't used it ever. It was just an email address supplied by Harvard.
Yeah.
But I'm so glad that Professor Gates got in touch with me out of the blue and identified himself, which I actually already knew, as a fellow West Virginian. So I'm delighted to be here together. And Skip, I want to talk a bit about the culture of West Virginia, the politics of the region, the religion of the region, and about your experience growing up in what was then a very tight-knit Black community in Piedmont, West Virginia. Piedmont is the second biggest town, really just, I would say, a village.
2,500 people in 1950.
People in Mineral County. The largest town is Kaiser, which maybe had, what would you say?
It had 7,500.
Yeah, so, small town life.
But it was a white town. It was an Irish-Italian paper mill town with a handful of Black people. It wasn't a Black town.
And the respect in the paper mill distinguished it from other parts of West Virginia, including where I grew up, where the industry was coal.
Yeah, we didn't have coal. We had paper.
But you also had, because you had a factory, you had unions, and unions were a central part of life.
Local 676, the United Paper Makers and Paper Workers of America. My father was elected trustee over and over and over again. So I learned about politics first through union politics. But Piedmont was an Irish-Italian paper mill town. And one of the curious things about growing up there, as Robbie said, I was born in 1950. You were born in 55. Brown v. Board, remember, is 1954. Schools integrated in Mineral County, West Virginia in 1955. And that didn't happen in Morgantown, and God knows it didn't happen in the southern part of the state, which is where the coal is concentrated and where, consequently, the Black population in West Virginia, which was always small, but was disproportionately concentrated in McDowell County, and Wyoming County, and Monroe County. For God only knows why, the school board voted to integrate the schools in 1955. So I started first grade, 1956, at the white school. And my brother, who's 5 years older, had gone to the colored school, as we would have put it.
This was Rocky.
Rocky. My brother, I have one brother. It was Dr. Paul Gates, educated at Potomac State College and West Virginia University, at dental school. And he's a very prominent oral surgeon who's now retired. So he went the first 5 years at the segregated school and then started sixth grade at the white school, at the integrated school. And then he went to the high school and I was at the elementary school. So we never overlapped. But it is astonishing that this white school board, without any kind of pressure, voted to integrate the schools. I think that it was probably, any idiot could figure out that it was just stupid having two separate school systems for a handful of black people. I don't know. One of the things that we joke about is, well, you know, basketball is very big in West Virginia, and it was particularly big when we were growing up because of Jerry West. Right. And so even the head of the Ku Klux Klan could figure out that the high school was going to have a better basketball team if they let these brothers in there. But we were told that we couldn't dance with white girls. That was the thing. There couldn't be any socializing. You could not cross the color line in terms of romance. And you know what the consequence of that was? Everybody spent all their time fantasizing about interracial dating, and a considerable amount of that did go on, but underground.
So integration seems, again, we're here relying on this wonderful memoir that Professor Gates wrote. It's now quite long in the past. I think he wrote it in the early 1990s, but it's still just a wonderful read. Integration went smoothly for that particular school.
Piece of cake, yeah.
And you, though one of the new black children just entering the school, were together with, if I remember her name correctly, was it Linda Hoffman?
Yeah, Brenda. That was Brenda Kimmel.
Brenda Kimmel?
That's her pseudonym was Linda Hoffman.
Linda Hoffman in the book.
Yeah, but her real name was Brenda Kimmel.
And you were black, and you were the two stars of the elementary school.
That's right. And if she were here, she would say she was the smarter of the two. You know, every year, I summer Martha's Vineyard. Thank God. You know, it's a great blessing for 2 months. And every year, different assortments of seven women called the princesses. 4 or 5 each year will come up and spend 4 days. And the thing that I have in common with these, they're all white except for one. So in the group, 6 white girls, and you can see why I'm calling them girls in a minute. 6 white girls and 1 black. And the thing that we have in common is that we met on August 31st, 1956, the first day of first grade. And we are still best friends, including Brenda Kimmel. And Brenda's father was a pharmacist and her grandfather. So we called Dr. Kimmel. And we were bitter rivals every day for 12 years. But it's quite amazing. I mean, I don't know how many of you are still in touch with 7 people. And we were in school every day of school for 12 years. I started first grade with 24 kids in my class, and we graduated a class of 36. So people would move to work at the mill, and the class expanded. So I have deep, abiding, loyal, loving friendships that go back to the first day of first grade. It's quite remarkable, really.
And well, what I find so remarkable about that story is that it was okay for a little black kid to be one of the 2 top students in the class.
Yeah.
Now, that would not have been okay where I was for one of the foreign kids.
That's
because
interesting.
the foreign kids were not supposed to be at the top.
So
the
you
American kids were supposed to be at the top.
You said Syrian, and what was the other?
Italian.
That's Syrian and Italian. Well, we had, yeah, that is interesting.
You had, as you described in the book, the people whose first names began with the letter O, and people whose last names began with the letter O. Or ended with the letter O.
So my dad worked 2 jobs. He was at the paper mill in the daytime, and he worked as a janitor at the telephone company. There was a small branch of the Chesapeake and Potomac Telephone Company in Piedmont where the operators worked. So there are half a dozen operators that put those things in. I call them hoses, but that's not what they are. You know, you put them to connect the call. So it was a piece of cake, this job, right? It wasn't a dirty job. So we were the wealthiest Black family in Piedmont because my dad worked 2 jobs. This is all relative. I didn't know we were poor until I went to Yale and took a sociology class. I went, damn, I've been poor my whole life. I should feel bad. And so we had a living room where all the furniture was covered in plastic, clear plastic, right? Look at all the heads bobbing. I never figured out who my mother thought was going to drop in, like Queen Elizabeth when she was down in Washington. Piedmont, by the way, is halfway between Pittsburgh and Washington, D.C., almost exactly. And it's on the Potomac River in the Allegheny Mountains. There were 424 miles between Calhoun College at Yale and my parents' right on the street in front of the house. So I know because I drove it all the time. And 423.8 were in states than West Virginia, because it's right on the Maryland-West Virginia border. It's a tri-state area. So Pennsylvania, Bedford, Pennsylvania is nearby. Maryland is right there. The Potomac River separates the two, and you could literally throw a silver dollar.
It is in the hills. It's in the Alleghenies.
It's in the Allegheny Mountains.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, extraordinarily beautiful. So the day before first grade, the day before I met all these now women, the night before, Daddy took me into the formal living room. And you never went in there. And I thought, oh my God, you know, I'm going to die. You know, like, I wonder what the world I did. And Daddy called me, he lived to be 97 and a half. And he called me Boyd till the day he died. He said, Boyd, something we need to talk about. And I was terrified. And I said, yes, sir. And he said, you're going over to the white school tomorrow? And I go, yes, sir. And he said, well, it's something you need to know. And I go, what's that? He said, there are 2 kinds of white people. And I said, 2 kinds of white people. Because we had seen there were white people who lived on my street. Though the Black people were concentrated on 2 streets. Everything was in miniature there. You know, kind of like Princeton, you know. It's and the Princeton was like New York City compared to Peabody, West Virginia. And I said, well, how do you tell the difference between these 2 kinds of white people? And Daddy said, that's why I brought you in this room. He said, they are the Irish, which we said, the Irish, and the Italians, right? And I said, well, how do I tell the difference, Daddy? And he said, that's why I brought you in. He said, the Irish have names that begin with O, and the Italians have names that end with O. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the secret to my success. Dealing with white people all these years. They had given me a test, probably one of the Stanford tests, that all the kids coming into the first grade had to take. And I remember that it probably was a series of tests. I don't know. But I remember that somebody white from the school or the school board came to talk to my parents. And I was shooed into the kitchen. And after this white person left, see, white people were, you know, you just never saw. You saw the milkman, he was white, so we called him Mr. Milkman, the postman, Mr. Postman, and the insurance man, because insurance is very big in Black communities, right? So we had a college fund, like 25 cents a week or whatever. So he was Mr. Insurance Man. So it was like Dickensian. Yeah. And so this white person left, and my parents came to me in the kitchen, and my mom always called me Skippy, and they said, Skippy, you're a very special person. And that man just said they gave you a test. As I recall, there were 500 questions on this battery test, and I had 489 right.
Huh.
So, and my brother had been at the white school the year before, and he is wicked smart. We have a gift, a genetic gift of memory. in the Gates family. My father and my brother had perfect memory. You know, they could play cards. Bridge, you don't want to play with them. Because they could tell you reneged on something a hand played 10 years ago, you know. And for my dad, he told me once, it was like everything was like a video. You know, experience was like a video. So he could just remember everything. He didn't have to remember it. It just, everything, he could just see it. I have a very good memory, but not like theirs. So, you know, I defer to them. So anyway, Rocky had done well in the 6th grade. My parents were the only Black people my mom was in the PTA, and as I wrote about, and there was one charity called the United Organizations. And my parents were active in that. My mother was one of the officers. So they were the, you know, elite Black family. And when I was, from day one, I was treated like a little prince. Because, you know, as a teacher, you respond to the kids who respond to your teaching. So, and I was just on fire, right? So it was easy to see how a teacher would think I was a cute little kid because, you know, all the time, right? And so I gave them positive feedback. But it never occurred to me that I was never worried about that. And that was good for my parents. Now, this is a year after Emmett Till and, you know, all this stuff of Montgomery, bus boycott, both in 1955. And none of that, it never occurred, not once did it occur to me that applied to me. I only knew, no matter what I thought of Brenda Kimball, I couldn't ever ask her out, right? Because that was the dividing line. And there was one sort of soda fountain place, the Cut Rate. And we couldn't sit down in the Cut Rate. We could go order lunch, take away, and our friends, classmates, could sit down and eat. So we could stand and eat. They had this fabulous hot dog and chili.
But why was an exception made for your dad? Why was your dad allowed?
My dad looked white.
He looked white.
Yeah.
And that was the reason?
Yeah, I think that was the reason, and because he worked at I said he had the second job at CMP, the Chesapeake Potomac Telephone Company, and it was 200 yards up the street from so I don't know, one of his best friends, we eventually bought their home, was the head guy at the telephone company. So I don't know if he told Carl Daddysman, who was the racist who owned this place, or just because my father could pass. They knew that he was a Negro, that my father never tried to pass. And I look like my mother in terms of my phenotype, as you'll see in a minute. But Daddy could sit down there, but the rest of us couldn't.
From the book, it sounds as though your mom could be pretty rough on the white folks.
Yeah.
And your dad would be pretty rough on the Black folks. Is that true?
Daddy was, my father, if you explained what structure and agency were, my father was all about agency. It was, if you worked hard in the United States, you could succeed no matter who you were. Don't tell me about slavery. We never had a conversation about the cumulative impact of slavery or Jim Crow racism. Not one time. But he would talk about somebody as a racist. He hated George Wallace and, you know, Orville Faubus. I remember watching Little Rock when I was 7 on TV. And I remember, and I write about this, I remember the white people in Little Rock, they had the high school cheerleaders and they were chanting 2, 4, 6, 8, we don't want to integrate. And their faces were full of so much hatred. But my parents had me watch that and I was in the 2nd grade. So I was aware that there were places unlike Piedmont in terms of the school system. But it never occurred to me that anything would ever be put in my way as a barrier because of the fact that I was Black. Not once. I always was the number 1 in class, except the one year. Now, this is when Brenda would roll her eyes. My grandmother died. You know, the standardized tests.
Big Mom?
No. Big Mama's mom is the Gates. Yeah. Gertrude Helen Redmond Gates. And my grandmother died. and I insisted on taking the test. And Brenda beat me. And I said, it was only because I was in mourning that you beat me by it. And she'd go, yeah. But, and I was going to be a doctor because Allsmart, Piedmont had turned out a lot of doctors, not black doctors, but doctors. And I was, and Rocky was going to be a doctor before me. And, you know, he was 5 years, but 6 grades ahead because he had been skipped a grade because he was so smart. And it was just the way it was. I remember in the 5th grade, Mrs. McDowell gave me her son's dissecting kit, which he had gotten the first year of medical school or something. And then he had not finished. And she said, my son didn't finish, but you know, you're going to finish and I want you to have that. I remember in the 2nd grade, Mrs. Meller set me up in the back and started giving me Spanish lessons.
Huh.
So, you know, I was treated differently. I was elected class president 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade.
In an integrated school.
Yeah, it was like 90% white. Just a handful of black people in that town. I'll give you, if memory serves, 386 black people in Piedmont in the federal census of 1950 out of 2,500. So, you know.
Now, do I remember correctly that Rocky your brother was cheated out of the Golden Horseshoe, but you
yes,
were not.
That's right. So, in West Virginia, in ranking, there's the Nobel Prize, there's the Pulitzer Prize, and then there's the Golden Horseshoe. The Golden Horseshoe is for mastery of West Virginia history. That is serious business. Anybody can get the Pulitzer Prize and the Nobel Prize. But getting the Golden Horseshoe is, and they prep you from the 4th grade. Oh my God. You have to memorize the flowers, the flora, the fauna. The fact that whatever famous person even passed through the hills of West Virginia, George Washington had a little old shed and he passed through on the 5th of March in 1776. You know, you have to remember, because I think it's fair to say that, and I say this with love, that West Virginians had a collective inferiority, a cultural inferiority complex, because people made fun of them as being hillbillies. And there's even a commercial that bothers me now, which when the kids are naked and colored, and it's a beer commercial, and they misspell West Virginia, and someone then moves the one from the other, you know, they spell it correctly, and I go, there they are making fun of West Virginia, all over again. But Rocky took the Golden Horseshoe test in the 8th grade. Now, if you win the 4 kids in every county are chosen who scored the highest on this West Virginia history test, okay? Then you go down to Charleston, the state capital, and meet the governor. But to do that, because we lived over near Washington, near Harper's Ferry, you had to stay in the hotel. And the big hotel was the Daniel Boone Hotel. And that year,
segregated, I believe, wasn't it?
Which was totally segregated. Elgin Baylor. How many of you ever heard of Elgin?
Basketball stuff.
Elgin Baylor, his team had the Lakers, the Minneapolis Lakers, right? And then they became the LA Lakers, if I remember correctly. Right. They had done an exhibition game in Charleston, and the Daniel Boone Hotel refused to let him stay there. And so obviously they were not going to let Paul Edward Gates stay there, Rocky. And so they told him that he misspelled a word, that he came that close, that he misspelled a word. And if he had only spelled this word right, he would have won the Golden Horse. And that broke his heart. And I remember that, and I remember his face, and he was punishing himself for just, how could I have misspelled that word? Because I told you he had a great memory. And it was a really cruel thing that they did. It might not sound like a big deal, but when you're in the 8th grade, and this was the goal.
In West Virginia, the Golden Horseshoe. That's the Nobel Prize.
It is. It's a big deal. And so, about a month or so later, Mr. Shaver, the same white man who ran the telephone company office that I mentioned earlier, and maybe it was Mr. Shaver who told the guy who owned the cut rate to let Gates in, right, and let him sit down, he showed up. And he and my father were very close friends. And Mom and Dad and Mr. Shaver were in the front, that same front room with the plastic coated sofa. And they were hushed tones. And then after he left, they came out to the kitchen and Rocky was there. And they said, Rocky, you didn't misspell a word. The Daniel Boone Hotel was segregated and they could, and that's why, and so I was determined I was going to win the Golden Horseshoe. I mean, you can't make yourself win something, but that was a goal that I wanted to do. And I think very few Black people had ever won the Golden Horseshoe before I did. End of the story. The final beat of the story is I got to know John Rockefeller IV. The reason all my PBS programs are at WETA in Washington is because Sharon Rockefeller, Jay's wife, Sharon Percy Rockefeller, remember Chuck Percy?
The senator from Illinois.
And remember her twin sister was murdered. They never solved that murder. He was the president of Bell and Howell. And when Jay Rockefeller came to West Virginia, he was going to be governor and then president. That was the plan. He married this, it was a fairy tale wedding, and he married Sharon Percy. And she is the CEO and president of WETA I met her, I think, my senior year of high school. I can't remember the reason I was, oh yes. So Jay I wrote my senior thesis on Jay Rockefeller's political campaign. It was going to be the making of a governor, except he lost.
1968, he lost to Arch Moore.
Yeah, 72.
72.
So he lost to Arch Moore. Subsequently, he would win, okay? And so I worked for Jay. I met my first wife working for Jay. And when he finally became governor, I wrote to him and I told him this story. And I didn't hear from him. Then one night, very late at night, my phone rang and a person with a deeply emotional voice just said, thank you. And then he hung up. And it was my brother. Jay had got the state legislature to change the record and give my brother the Golden Horseshoe, and they sent his little Golden Horseshoe. Yeah. So
now I have to confess that I did not win the Golden Horseshoe, but I got the only thing from a West Virginian's point of view that would be better than the Golden Horseshoe. In recognition of outstanding achievement in landing a state record, a brook trout on the second day of August, 1968, which measured 18.75 inches total length and weighed 3.5 pounds. That's a serious trout. That's a serious brook.
And I like to fish. I still fish. But I never caught anything like that. But I could do striped bass, nice sized striped bass.
Well, you were near, in Piedmont, of course, you're near the South Fork of the Potomac, which is the best smallmouth bass and channel catfish water, I think, anywhere in the East. Right?
That's right. Fantastic. The North Branch and the South Branch. You get different kind of fish out of both.
And the water's clean and the fish are wonderful to eat.
Yeah. Trout and bass and sunnies. So you learn to cast and you get sunfish, and which are so bony, and you learn how to clean the fish. Now, I go fishing on the vineyard in the summer, which is ocean fishing, not too far out. And I go with Glenn Hutchins, one of my best friends. He's a philanthropist. He's one of the owners of the Celtics. He funded the Hutchins Center, which I direct. And we go bone fishing.
Oh, that's great. So fly fishing. Yeah,
fly fishing in the Bahamas on Andros Island at a 5-star fishing camp.
A long way from Piedmont, Skip. That's a long way.
Not in a private plane. Private planes are great. No TSA, nothing like that. They go, that's for regular people. I go, really? Oh, wow, that's great.
Let's talk about some of the ways growing up that our people, yours and mine, were.
Can I say one more thing before I forget? One of the things I'd like to think that has characterized my work is writing about the ironies of the social construction of identities and multiple identities. And I've always insisted on that. I didn't have to read that. Nobody taught me that, because I embody multiple social identities that shift in terms of importance and have my whole life. Being from West Virginia, as you could tell from these crazy kind of conversations, being from West Virginia, I tell my students, is as important, this is going to sound hyperbolic, but it's not, is as important as being Black in the shaping of who I am. Mountaineers are always free, rugged individualism, growing up in those hills. I have a purchase on those hills. We didn't immigrate. I do not descend from recent, we immigrated. I did not descend from recent immigrants. As Robbie said, we can I am the most DNA tested Black man in the history of the world. I win hands down on that. And I have a fabulous family tree. And I have a fabulous family tree, one, because I have access to the world's greatest genealogists, but also because I descend from, on 3 lines, from 3 sets of what we used to call free Negroes or free people of color. If you were free, then you have a paper trail. If your ancestors were free, no matter what color they were, they are listed by names in the federal census. So at any given point, I think, well, and you could fact check me right now. In 1860, I think 12% of the African American people were free, which means that their names were in the federal census. For the other 88%, their names were not in the federal census. There's one little quirky. There are 3 counties where some clerk wrote down the first and last names of enslaved people. In one was in Texas, in the county. I was praying to get a guess, and it was Anita Hill.
Oh my goodness!
Anita Hill's family was from, so we could trace her family tree back, but that's a parenthesis. So I'm 2 sets of freed Black people were freed by the American Revolution. And one was a white neighbor named John Riley, I think, tried to force him back into slavery, saying that he was not free. And 6 white men testified that he was free, and he got, and we have the
once free, always free rule.
Yeah, and we in 1795 and 1796, and we don't have a court transcript, but we have a description of the actual case.
That is fascinating.
And then the third, in the will of Abraham Van Meter, written in 1821, Joe and Sarah Bruce on my father. The other 2 sets are on my mom's side. Joe and Sarah Bruce were freed in the will upon my death, and then upon the death of my wife Elizabeth, my faithful servants Joe and Sarah Bruce, and he gave them 1,000 acres of land. And some of my cousins still own some of that land.
That's a lot of land.
That's a lot of land.
In those days, that was an enormous amount of land.
And that's in Hardy County, and it's 30 miles from where I grew. So my family migrated 30 miles over 200 years. Think about that. That is a lot of stability. And of all the guests whose ancestors we've ever traced, that's not true of anybody whose family tree that we ever did. That they descend from 3 sets of 4th grade grandparents who lived 30 miles from where they did. In Europe, in the old days, that's the way it was. But in my life, you know.
A difference in our experience is that you grew up with educated, well-educated, university-educated elders in some cases, I think on the Gates side.
Yes,
family.
on the Gates side.
And I did not. So I was the first in I'm first generation, in my family.
Oh my God.
You had several
on both.
Aunts, were they, on the Gates side who had university degrees?
Get this. And you want me to do a little demonstration?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Let me. So I'm not going to. That's the video for the 10th anniversary of Finding Your Roots, different election. I descend from, this is the oldest Gates ever recorded. This is Jane Gates. She was born in 1819 and she died in 1888. And the day that I saw this photograph, I remember the day, it was July 2nd, 1960. I was 9 years old, okay? And, well, I'll run through the genealogy. So Jane had 5 children, and they all looked white. I descend from her oldest son, Edward. Edward's a big name in the Gates family. And she only told her children that they all had the same father and that he was white. That was it. Edward, my great-grandfather, was born in 1857. He died in 1945, 5 years before I was born. And Jane took the secret of his paternity to her grave. All right? So, this is my grandfather. This is his obituary in Cumberland, Maryland. Cumberland was the biggest city in western Maryland. It was west of Hagerstown. And it was a big industrial area. The B&O, the Celanese, Pittsburgh Plate Glass, Kelly Springfield Tires, and Allegheny Ballistics were all there.
It's a beautiful town in the mountains. It's distinguished for the spires of the churches in the town. It's magnificent to see, actually.
And my grandfather was he was a sexton
At the church?
at the Episcopal Church. Yeah, Emmanuel Episcopal Church. So, this is my grandfather's baby picture. My grandfather was look at that, typical African-American boy, right? My grandfather was so white, we called him Casper behind his back. He was born in 1879 and he died in 1960. That's his father. The man back there in the middle of that photograph is Jane Gates's oldest son, my great-grandfather.
Wow.
And this is his daughter, Pansy. This is his oldest daughter. He had 3 daughters. That's my great-grandfather and his wife, Maudeline. My daughter's name Maud. There are 3 generations of Maud. On the Gates family farm in Patterson's Creek, West Virginia. They owned a 200-acre farm on, they called it Gates Run, which is Patterson's Creek, which runs into one of the branches of the
I really want people to appreciate 200, that's a big farm in West Virginia.
That was a big farm in West Virginia. And that's on the farm. And my daddy, whom you're going to meet in a minute, was born on that farm, which is 15 miles from Piedmont. Okay? And this is their children. And there's Edward up there, that bad photograph. And they were the 3 daughters. All right, you ready for this? My great-grandparents made the decision to send the 3 girls to college in the beginning of the 20th century, not the boys.
The boys had to
Which
work the farm.
really pissed my grandfather never, ever forgave them. They all went to Howard. Pansy, who loved me, I knew them all. Pansy was the first member of the Gates family to graduate from Howard. She went to nursing school at Freedman's Hospital. And Maud, remember I said there were a bunch of Mauds, Maud and Letitia graduated from, became teachers. Pansy married a dentist. Maud married a pharmacist in Baltimore. And Letitia married a sign painter. So they married well. And they definitely were in the elite by color and by class. You marry a dentist. So they went to Martha's Vineyard. And there was a black country club. They were called the New Jersey Matrons. You know, their husbands were doctors and dentists. And her best friend was Jean Davis's mother, Jean Curtis Davis. She married Charles Davis, my mentor at Yale. Right? We finally all figured out when Jean said, "Are you related to Pansy Gates?" I go, "Yes, my great aunt Pansy." And everybody fell out. So anyway, that's just the segue.
Skip, let me just ask you about Maud. Her middle name is Withers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's a common West Virginia name. One of our fellow West Virginians is Bill Withers, the great musician.
Yeah, from Slab Fork.
Yeah, from Slab.
No relation.
No relationship.
No. He was down there in the coal fields.
Yeah.
And that's my daddy. Henry L. That's what everybody called him. Henry L. And this is my family. My favorite photograph of all. That's Rocky. That's my dad. That's my beautiful mother, Pauline Augusta Coleman. See, I'm a Coleman on my mother's side. And the guy defending passionately the Second Amendment would be me. I had a great toy gun collection. And then I won't tell you the rest of what. Oh, this is Jane Gates's obituary. So for a black person in overwhelmingly white Cumberland, Maryland, to get 3 obituaries, this is the crucial one, dated January 8th, 1888. So I'll tell you very quickly. We buried Pop Gates, my grandfather, right? He's buried in the Gates are Episcopalian. It was an integrated cemetery. All the other cemeteries were segregated, but the Episcopalians, because there were only a handful of black Episcopalians, right? So we bury him at the Rose Hill Cemetery in Cumberland, where Jane is buried. We have the whole Gates family plot. And then we come back. Daddy takes us upstairs in the house that Jane paid cash for in an all-white neighborhood in Cumberland in 1870 for $1,200. Now, she had those 5 kids looking white. You don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to figure this out, right? So, and we still have that house is now on the National Registry. He takes Rocky and me upstairs. My grandparents' bedroom has a sun porch off of it. We go out there. There's a big armoire, and Daddy opened it, and it was full of bank ledgers like this. It's the only one that's left. And it turns out my grandfather was stealing. He was a janitor at the First National Bank in Cumberland, Maryland. He was stealing these bank ledgers. But Rocky and I thought it meant that we were rich and Daddy was about to disclose the family fortune. But he was stealing them to use them as scrapbooks. And he would clip newspapers and he would glue all kind of stuff. He had an inordinate fascination with death, every kind of death. Automobile accidents, railroad accidents, airplane accidents, and then the daily war dead from that area. So every day the war dead would be on the front page, and he clipped all of those things. So Daddy is pulling out these scrapbooks from the armoire, looking for something. Rocky and I don't know what the hell is going on. And finally, after maybe the 6th scrapbook, Daddy says, I found it. He said, look, you boys, look at this. If you could see, Aunt Jane Gates, a well-known and estimable colored woman, died at her residence on Green Street, age 75 years old. An estimable colored woman. And then he pulled that photograph out between the leaves of that scrapbook. And he said, this is the oldest Gates. I never want you to forget her name or her face. There was no warning, no prelude to this. He just did it. Then Rocky and I looked at each other. Daddy was on the floor. Daddy gathers up all the scrapbooks, put them back in the armoire. We go downstairs for the repast. And then we drive 25 miles back home to West Virginia. Now, remember I said we were the richest black people in Piedmont. So I had my own bedroom, and I had this beautiful antique bookcase and desk that my mother had gotten from a white family whose house she used to clean when she was a little girl after this woman had died. And on my desk, next to my bed, sat an old-fashioned red Webster's Dictionary. Remember those? I still love dictionaries, and I love that dictionary. I mean, I'm now the general editor of the forthcoming Oxford Dictionary of African American English, and it's all a riff on that dictionary. And the last thing I did, ladies and gentlemen, before I went to bed, was look up the word estimable, because I had no idea what it meant. And I thought, wow, that funny looking lady who was a midwife. I didn't know what a midwife was. This is her nursing outfit. I said, if that funny looking lady's estimable, maybe I'm estimable too. The next day was July 3rd, 1960. And remember I said, despite the fact that the school was integrated and I didn't suffer any discrimination, we were segregated socially. So the paper mill had a white picnic and a colored picnic. And we went to the colored 4th of July picnic on July 3rd. And on the way back, Red Bowles, that was his name, he was of Irish descent, had what we call a convenience store. And I said, Daddy, buy me a composition book. And he did. And that night, in front of our 12-inch black and white TV, and by the way, cable came to Piedmont, West Virginia in 1949. all my students think cable was something invented for kids in New York. Cable was invented for people who lived in mountains. So Western Maryland, Western Pennsylvania, and Eastern West Virginia got cable. So we had nine channels, and most of them came from Baltimore and Washington, which is a great thing growing up. Because I didn't grow up with, my first wife grew up with things from Charleston, stations from Charleston and Huntington. Believe me, there's a big difference. I grew up with all the programs that kids in DC got, like It's Academic with Mac McGarry or whatever. So I could gauge how smart I was on Saturday night up against Episcopal High School and Saint this and Saint all that. But anyway, I'm on the way back from the colored picnic. Daddy bought me a composition book. And that night in front of our 12-inch black and white TV, I interviewed my mother and father about what only years later I would learn is called your family tree or your genealogy. I did my first family tree when I was 9 years old, the day after I met Jane, the estimable Jane Gay, because I wanted to figure out how someone with my physical features could be descended from a grandfather who was so white that we tease him about being a ghost behind his back. And then, what in the world was a slave anyway? And she didn't look like any African I saw in Tarzan, so where was she from? I was just trying to puzzle all this out, functioning on instinct. And my shrink said to me about a month ago, something that just floored me. He said, you realize that the only reason that you invented Find Your Roots was all because of this 24 hours of events that unfolded in your little life when you were 9 years old. Because the punchline is, season 11 is about to air, Find Your Roots, the #1 bragging nonfiction series on PBS. 4.5 million people watch Find Your Roots every week, which is, for PBS, incredible. And in the last episode, you will see, if you're kind enough to watch, 150 descendants of Jane Gates gathered in Cumberland, Maryland, and our genius genetic genealogist, C.C. Moore, Google her, C.E.C.E. Moore, subject of a profile in the New Yorker 3 or 4 Decembers ago. C.C. Moore puts me on the stage. I'm the guest. And she reveals the identity of my long-lost great-great-grandfather. Took her 4 years building up family trees through my DNA. How many of you have had your DNA done? Trace. So you know when you have those 4th and 5th and 6th cousins and you go, that's just noise. It's not true. That's where the gold is. If you're trying to get around the metaphorical brick walls in a family tree. 4 years. And we knew he was Irish because I have the O'Neill haplotype. So 10% of the men in Dublin, more or less, and I have exactly the same Y DNA, which all men get from their father, an identical genetic signature. But now I know his identity. And it would be revealed, and what my surname would have been. It certainly wouldn't have been Gates. And more or less where he was from in Ireland. And now I have a new family tree going back to my 5th great grandfather. It's amazing. So I outed Jane, you know. I used to pass her grave and say, Grandma, I'm going to tell who that white boy was that you slept.
Let's give some time to the Coleman side of the family, your mom's side of the family. Fascinating characters there. They are West Virginia, not Maryland, right?
Yeah, they're West Virginia.
They're hardcore West Virginia.
Yeah, right on the border. Now, about college, my mother had 9 brothers. Uncle Harry, who's still alive, graduated from BU in 1960.
So you had education at that level on your mom's side as well as your dad's side.
4 of my mother's 9 brothers went to college. My uncle Alvin became a professor at Prairie View, biology. He went to Michigan State. He wanted to be a doctor, didn't have enough money, taught biology at historically black Prairie View A&M in Texas. Excuse me. And then our 2 youngest brothers went to Potomac State. I don't think they got their associate degree, but then they worked at the paper mill. They got white collar jobs at the paper mill. But 2 of them actually graduated, and they had 2 sets of degrees, I think. My uncle Alvin went to West Virginia State, which was a black institution, down in Institute,
West Virginia.
and then went to Michigan State.
Okay.
And Harry went to BU. Harry Colvin.
Now, your mom did not go to college.
No, it was no way. My mother was born in 1916, but my mother worked and put them. I write about this. They would send their clothes, their white shirts, in these brown, I don't even know what you call these things. They were like this long and they had these straps, and they would send their white shirts, and she would launder it and starch them and fold them and then mail them back to her. Do you ever, anybody here remember a TV show or ever hear of a show called The Big Payoff? It was like Queen for a day. So one day, remember I started school in 1956. Our TV was on all the time. Okay. From the time whoever got up first turned the TV on. And when I went to bed, it was still on, like the hearth. And so I'm playing and our phone starts ringing off the hook. And there was this TV show called The Big Payoff. And the phone starts ringing, and they had a feature that someone could write in about why a person who had done wonderful things should be honored, right? And Harry, he's a Methodist minister, the guy who went to BU, had written in about how my mother did their laundry and sent them money when they were in college and how poor their family was and everything. And that letter was right there on the screen, man. They picked my mother for the big payoff.
So the stuff must have started coming.
Oh my God, she got American Tourister luggage and gold. And then 2 years later, she's elected the first colored secretary of the PTA. And she would be stopped. My mother was good looking. You can see her in that picture. And she had style. She studied sewing at a vocational school in Atlantic City. And so we had this Signature sewing machine that you could, next to the most valuable antique Steinway grand piano, that was nothing compared to that Signature sewing machine. You did not mess with that sewing machine. And my mother could do anything with that sewing machine, but she never sold anything, but she could make it. My sense of clothes, my sense of style came from my mother, without a doubt.
Also in the book, you talk about your mother's elocution.
Oh, yeah.
The way in which she spoke and the high standards to which she subjected herself and you guys.
Yeah, she prepped us. You know, in our Piedmont was like an art school. So that we had, are you ready for this? The high school, 6th grade, the elementary 6th grade, right? They didn't have a junior high school. When you showed up in 7th grade, you were either assigned to the House of York or the House of Lancaster. Nope. The War of the Roses. And we were taught about the War of the Roses. And every 6 weeks, we were up for literary. That's what it was called. It was called literary. And the whole school would go to the gym, and the Lancastrians and the Yorkists, right? There would be debates, poetry, narrative reading, and then you would be coached by the English teacher, and then you had to square off. And then there'd be judges, and it's amazing. Think about that in the hills of West Virginia. Mama would rehearse us. Mama said, these people, they don't want colored people really to win. And so she would say, no, Skippy, you have to do it like this. You have to do it like that. And when she read those minutes, oh my God.
At the PTA meeting.
At the PTA meeting.
And she read the eulogies in church, I understand. Is that right?
If you were colored and you died in the Potomac Valley, Pauline Gates memorialized you, man. The family would call, and the newspaper would call and say, Pauline, would you write the obituary? And those obituaries did double duty because she would read them as eulogies in the church. And before I started 1st grade, she would dress me up and I would go sit in the church and hear all this wailing. These are black churches, man. It was serious. I love the music, right? And people would be getting the Holy Ghost and stuff. And the minister then at the appropriate time would call on my mother and she would stand up looking like a goddess. It sounded like a poet. And she would read. I wrote in Colored People that my mother made people remember the person that you wanted to be in your heart before the world punished you with its various forms of cruelty. And I remember coming home from one of the funerals, and Daddy happened to be off, or it was one of Daddy's friends. And I was holding their hands. And it makes me tear up a little bit thinking some of these stories. My daddy said, Pauline, you did a good job today. You did extra good today. And she said, well, thank you, Gates. And I was holding her hand. And then Mama said, yeah, you did so well, in fact, that I started to stand up in the middle of your eulogy and walk up to the altar, open the casket to see if that mean son of a bitch was still in there. And she goes,
you eulogize the person you would have been.
yeah. And she goes, Gates don't use a language like that in front of that little boy. And then they busted out laughing, and she loved it. And so it took me years to realize that my first model for a writer was my very own mother. She was not only read him, she would then publish what she had written in the Piedmont Herald or the Cumberland. Yeah. And so in retrospect, it was inevitable I'd end up getting a PhD in English, rather than becoming a medical doctor.
When did you abandon medicine as your ambition?
I still haven't.
Oh.
I was lucky enough to get a MacArthur in the first group. And the only reason I'm mentioning that is, and that was when nobody even knew what it was. I was 30 years old and had a 1-year-old daughter. We didn't have any money. I was a little lecturer at Yale. I just got my PhD. The first thing when I got off when Roderick MacArthur called me, which was, life-changing experience. All of a sudden I had this money. And the first thing though, that I said, now I can go back to I can go to medical school.
Oh,
yeah. Because it took me a long time to shake that. But I was put on earth to do exactly what I'm doing.
Yeah, you do it well.
Yeah.
Let's talk a bit about Appalachian religion. So, being foreign people, we were not part of what I'm about to.
Did you go to Orthodox?
Well, we were Catholic on my mother's side and Orthodox on my father's side. Right. There were very few Orthodox people, a small Greek community, even smaller Syrian community. The Syrian community was basically my family.
Right.
That was it.
But there's Syrians in Charleston.
There are in Charleston, exactly.
Right.
And there's a cathedral actually in Charleston.
Yeah.
But,
like Fred Haddad, you see that when you see Haddad trucks, which are all over Boston, that family's from
West Virginia.
Yeah.
But so in what my mother would call the American community, among the American people,
I love that thing. This is great.
Religion was class. It was linked to class.
Absolutely.
So at the bottom end were people who were holiness Pentecostal.
That's right.
And they would attend Church of God or Assemblies of God.
That's right.
Now, step up from that were people who were independent Baptist, free will Baptist.
Right.
Step up from
free
that, you had people who were members of national Baptist conventions, like the Southern Baptist Convention or the American Baptist. And then just step up from that with the Methodists. And then you got into the high class people.
Presbyterian.
Presbyterian. And then at the very top, the Episcopalian.
My father would say the true church.
Now, was there a parallel sort of
absolutely
in the African American community?
Yeah, absolutely. But everybody was Methodist or Baptist. Zora Neale Hurston.
Well, there must have been some holiness.
Oh yeah, I forgot.
Church of God in Christ.
Church of God in Christ. I wrote about this. The Church of God in Christ, that is where the Holy Ghost lived. I would turn the corner. The Methodist church, my mama's church was the Methodist church. It was on Water Street. There's right there, the lawn, that's the Potomac River. So Water Street, right? When I turned the corner down Water Street, I crossed over because the Church of God in Christ was down there because I was afraid if I walked by the Holiness Church, we call it, the Holy Ghost would snatch me up. I was terrified of that church. So the Methodists had a little more higher class than the Baptists.
But they would still be what we would regard today as evangelical, right?
Yeah, they would get the Holy Ghost.
Very Bible-based.
And they would rock.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And as far as the church, everybody was lit, not the Episcopalians or the Catholics or the Presbyterian. But in the black community, the Bible was the word of God. And he spoke in King James English. And that was the way and don't be messing with that, but talk about interpretation.
So the Colemans were Methodist.
Colemans were Methodists.
And
Big Mom.
Big Mom was very religious. So Big
totally.
Mom was very devout in the church.
Yeah.
And in fact, she wouldn't leave, right? She wouldn't leave when they wanted to close the...
Yeah, you can forget that. They didn't want to... to go over to the white church. You know, the Methodists decided that segregated things probably weren't very Christian. It took them a long time. And Big Mom said, I went to the colored Methodist church and I was, this is my seat. And then, you know, then she died. She did not want to, you know, integrate.
And the Gateses were Episcopalian.
Totally from the start. Maud and Edward were the founders, among the founders of St. Philip's. If you ever, I mean, this is just a kinky little fact, but I noticed that many Black Episcopal churches were called St. Philip's. And it puzzled me then. But if you remember the Ethiopian eunuch.
Oh, there you go.
That's in Philippians.
Yeah, yeah.
And he's reading the book of Isaiah. Oh. So the only way that Black people could get close to the New Testament, right, with the Black history fact, was through, and this guy was for real. He was the treasurer of the kingdom of Meroe, M-E-R-O-E. And Meroe was where Nubia changed names. Egypt got all its gold from Nubia. And Nubia, the kingdom of Cush in the Bible, that's a real place. That ran roughly between Khartoum, the capital of Sudan, and the Aswan Dam, the first cataract. And I've made films about it. Wonders of the African World, and then my more recent series on Africa called Africa's Great Civilization. And the Candace, or the Candace, every woman named Candace, is there any Candace in here?
No Candace.
Every woman, you could look this up, every woman named Candace got the name from the queen of Meroe. She was called Candace, C-A-N-D-A-C-E. And that is the etymology of the name Candace. Isn't that wild?
That is wild. And it also helps to explain the name of the wonderful Black school in Dallas, where Cornel West and I have frequently visited, called St. Philip's Academy.
Oh, yeah. In St. Philip's. So they went to St. Philip's Episcopal Church in Cumberland.
You say in the book...
But then it was closed when they integrated. Yeah.
And that's where I got you. You say in the book, toward the end of the book, that integration came to the African-American community in Piedmont with a tinge of sadness.
Oh, yeah.
Because it meant the picnic was gone.
The picnic was gone.
The churches were on their way out.
People said, and it's the difference between enforced separation and willing association. I remember my Aunt Marguerite, one of my mom's two sisters, just said, this is not what, I didn't buy into civil rights to tell them that the colored picnic had to be shut down or that our church had to be shut down. We have a right to associate. And that floored me, and she's right. I mean, I believe in willing association. Nothing wrong with that. If we had said white people couldn't have come over to the colored picnic, but nobody would have dreamed of saying that. But we lost a lot because of the integration.
And that's because the black institutions basically shut down.
Or were shut down. When the school integrated, it was great for little Skippy Gates, but not for all the Black teachers in the elementary and the high school. You know what they did with them? They fired all of them but one.
So what survived were the white schools?
The white schools.
The white businesses,
The white school took one of the Black teachers from the Black elementary school, was hired to teach in the integrated elementary school. And one of the high school teachers, the principal, Mr. Edwards, was hired to teach in the high school. One. That was it. I didn't have a Black teacher. I only had one, and that was Jada Hunter, who taught typing in the 9th grade. All the kids, all the boys in the reason I answer emails quickly when I get them is because, well, I'd played saxophone in the school band, and I'm dexterous, and the first Black teacher that I ever had was the most beautiful Black woman you have ever seen. Her name was Jada Hunter. And I lectured at Marshall University a few weeks ago, and she came and she stood up, and people almost dropped dead at how beautiful she looked.
So Huntington, West Virginia.
And I was like flying on the typewriter. And I would say, Miss Hunter, could you lean over here and look at my...
We just have a few minutes for questions from the audience, but I would like to take 2 or 3. So what would you like to ask us? Mike Rosson all the way in the back there? Yeah.
Let me explain that when this is over, he's going to rush me out because I'm flying to Miami. I'm officiating a wedding. And my wife is down there and she said, get yourself down there tonight. So I got to do it. I said, but Robbie George, she goes, I don't care about Robbie.
Yeah. I have to say that is the best excuse I've ever had from someone who didn't want to stay for dinner.
You often refer to the importance of West Virginia to your identity.
Yes.
And your family was in Mineral, previously Hampshire County, for a long time.
Hardy County.
Hardy County.
Yes.
There were plans at the West Virginia Constitutional Convention not to include those counties in the state.
Right.
How different do you think your story would have been if they had remained in Virginia?
Well, you have to remember that my freed ancestors were freed in the state of Virginia because West Virginia didn't become West Virginia until June 20th, 1863, right? And all my people were freed, on those lines, the last in that will written in 1821. So, and they had to petition for the right to stay in the state after, I believe it started with Nat Turner's rebellion, that free Negroes had to petition the state legislature to remain. And Joe and Sarah Bruce, the couple who got the 1,000 acres, their son Charles, there's a collection. Sorry, it's so rambling, but there's what's it called, the Black Codes of Virginia or the Black Laws of Virginia, and my family's petitions are in there.
Oh, yeah.
And they were granted until Elizabeth Van Meter died. Then the state legislature wrote and said, "You need to get out of out of Virginia," and they just ignored it and stayed. And no white person ever turned them in. So, and you don't get to look like that without a lot of canoodling, shall we say, up in the hollows. So the availability, the gene pool, what am I trying to say? You understand? There was a lot of interracial sex going on in those hills of West Virginia, a lot of communing across the color line. So I don't think I'm answering your question, but they did stay in Virginia until, their whole lives in the slave state of Virginia, which only became the free state of West Virginia during the middle of the Civil War. But you know what? Even in West Virginia, in the election of 1864, the good mountaineers turned down the right of black men to vote, for free black men to vote in the 1864 election. They did in New York too. Frederick Douglass campaigned like crazy for that. In the state of New York, free black men could vote if they satisfied $250 property requirement and something else that I can't remember.
Next question. Yes, can we go over here, Debbie? Yeah.
Oh, but I have to say something about my mother's side. My father used to say, I really got into the Gateses because they were Episcopalian. They smoked, they drank, they played cards, they were cool. I was saved when I was 12 years old and I joined my grandmother's church. And for 2 years, I didn't lust in my heart. I didn't go to basketball games. I didn't go to movies. I loved movies even then. I didn't dance. I didn't listen to black music because my mother was sick and she thought she was going to die. And if I say this quickly, I can get through it. I thought if I made a deal with Jesus that if my mother came back to the hospital when she left on a Sunday night and told me she was going to die, if I gave my life to Christ, then my mother would live. So 3 days later, my mother came back from the hospital. And I remember looking in the mirror and saying, oh my God, I made a deal with God.
Time to pay up.
Time to pay up. And so Saturday, there was one minister for the two Methodist churches, one in Kaiser, the county seat, and one in Peabody. So that the colored community in Kaiser had their service on Saturday afternoon. And then in Piedmont, it was Sunday morning. So at the age of 12, which is the age of consent or whatever it's called, I hitchhiked one Saturday afternoon. I didn't tell anybody. that Saturday afternoon, I hitchhiked down to the Black Methodist Church in Kaiser. And there were about 12 people there at church. And the average age was about 90 years old. And everybody knew everybody in the county, right? So they go, Skippy, it's great that you're here. And there's a moment in the service where the minister invites you to give your life to Christ. The call to the altar or something.
Altar call.
Yeah. And so when he did that, I stood up and you know what the minister said? Skippy, the toilet is back there. You know? I go, no, I want to join the church. They went, what?
Reverend Monroe?
Yeah. And so Ralph E. Del Monroe. Black people said Monroe. And so I stood up. It's one of the most moving things of my life, really. I went to the altar and everybody in the church got around me and they all joined hands. And the minister asked you, will you do this? And I think there are 5 questions. And I say, I do. You know, you promised you would do these things. And I started crying. They all cried. And then I guess we had communion. I don't know. And then one of them drove me home. So remember I said we had cable TV. And we were on that TV all the time. So it's Saturday night. I joined the church a few hours before. We had dinner. And we're watching, let's see. Saturday night was Gunsmoke and Sunday was Bonanza. Yeah, that's right. So the whole of America was what. See, I think we had a better society when we only had three channels. Because everybody, you know, on Monday you'd say, man, did you see Mr. Dillon and Chester? So my father loved a crossword puzzle. So he would do the crossword puzzle in the Cumberland paper. And he loved Alfred Hitchcock. So he subscribed to Alfred Hitchcock's magazine. Most of us didn't even know Alfred Hitchcock had a magazine. And he loved that. And on Sunday, we watch Alfred Hitchcock present. And I'd hear that music. I go, oh, shit. You know, I'm about to die. Alfred Hitchcock is going to scare me to death. I wouldn't have said shit, by the way. So Daddy's doing the crossword puzzle. It is Lazy Boy. I'm on the floor. Rocky's doing whatever he's doing. Mama's doing whatever at the sewing machine. And one of them said, well, Skippy, what'd you do today? I said, well, I joined the church. My father fell out of the chair. What? I said, I joined the church. He said, that is the dumbest thing I've heard in my whole life. And he was Episcopalian too. He thought all that these people were crazy. I never told them their whole life why I joined the church. Mama died. I mean, she lived through this thing. Through her medical crisis, but she died before colored people came out. But Daddy was alive when colored people came out. And that's when I revealed why I joined the church. But for 2 years, I didn't miss church. I sang in the choir. Everybody thought I was going to be a minister. I prayed as well as I could. I tried to keep the faith. I prayed a lot the night before exams. I would beat Brenda Kimmel, and God would help me do that.
Skip, you never revealed it to Mama?
No, never.
So she didn't know?
No. That was between me and it was sort of, I mean, it's so stupid, but it was pure.
Yeah.
Sure. It was just, other than the day my mother actually died, I was playing. It's Sunday. I look up and my parents are all dressed like they were going to church and they were going to the hospital. And Mama said, Skippy, I'm going to die and you be good, listen to your father, and I love you. So, and I just went hysterical. And so I went upstairs to my bedroom. I got on my knees and I prayed and cried and I said, if you let my mother live, I'll give my life to you, you know. Yeah. And then 3 days later, she came back. And that's when I went, okay, got to pay up.
We got a question over here.
It helped me on the SATs, all those good references to the King James Bible. Yeah. But you know what? I wouldn't sacrifice those years for anything. It was a task. I kept my word as best I could. You know, I had a deal.
It was formative.
Yeah. And I learned a lot. But you know why I stopped? I switched to the Episcopal Church when I was 14. And I stopped because I began to feel like a hypocrite. Because I was worshiping with people who thought the world had been created 7 days. And they didn't understand what an allegory was. I mean, they understood what an allegory was, but not the word allegory. But that an allegory was not something, you know, Uncle Remus or Brer Rabbit. They understood that kind of allegory. but not in the King James Bible.
Yeah.
The world was created in 7 days. There was a dude named Noah, built this big boat, and he had two kinds of everything, including mosquitoes, you know? I mean, that's just the way it was. And so I was taking biology, and I never thought the world was created in 7 days. You know what I mean? And I began to feel like a hypocrite, and that made me uncomfortable. In the Episcopal Church, you didn't have to even believe in God.
Over here.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming, Professor Gates. I'm a junior from Bluefield, born on the West Virginia side, but grew up.
Oh, you're from Bluefield?
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, great. My wife is in Pineville. And my Uncle Harry's first church was in Bluefield, the Methodist church.
Yes.
Bluefield brags. I don't know about with climate, whatever climate, degeneration. Bluefield used to brag that it was the naturally air-conditioned city. And if the temperature ever rose above what?
90 degrees, free lemonade.
Free lemonade in the whole. Yeah, isn't that wild? Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So
Now, did I take West Virginia history or not?
That's how you got that golden horse.
That's right.
Can you stand up, sir, to complete your question? Yeah.
I'm curious, what was your experience like at Yale, and how did the Black community respond to you going to school so far away?
Oh, well, I'd gone to Exeter for 6 weeks and got homesick, and so it's all complicated. We have to dial it back. I didn't just come out of nowhere. At the Episcopal Church camp, when I converted, as part of the preparation for my confirmation, the Diocese of West Virginia had a church camp, 18 in Romney, West Virginia. Peterkin.
Yeah.
And so I went in August of 65, and there were 3 Black kids out of 102 campers. And there were all these rich white kids, the Episcopal Church, right? And a lot of those kids went to New England prep schools. Actually, the coolest kid there was Mark Foster Etheridge III. And his father was the editor of the Detroit Free Press. And he was just so cool. He edited the campus of the camp newspaper, thank you. And he wrote an editorial about how the bishop cheated in softball. And I remember thinking, you're a bad dude, man. And the bishop was so pissed off. Bishop wanted to wring his neck. And I went up to him and I said, you're a bad dude. I go, where did you go to school? He said, a place called Exeter. I go, how you spell that? X? And I wrote to Exeter, and they were deliriously happy to find me. And Jay Rockefeller interviewed me. And my brother and I always tested well on standardized. Nobody told us that Black people didn't test well. So what at the PSATs, I got 99% or whatever. So Exeter said, boom. So they gave me a scholarship, full ride. When I was a rising senior in high school, I would voluntarily repeat my junior year. And I stayed 6 weeks. I was so homesick. And then at Exeter. So I went back home. I graduated senior year. I applied. My freshman year was not at Yale. It was at Potomac State College, which is a branch. It's like a community college, but it's a branch of West Virginia University, 5 miles away in the county seat. And people say, why in the world did you do that? Here's why I did that. I wrote to Exeter. I didn't apply to college. I wrote to Exeter and said, I made a mistake. And I want to come back for a PG year, postgraduate year. And then I want to go to Harvard, Yale, or Princeton, right? And my father's first cousin had graduated from Harvard Law School in 1949. Letitia, Maud's son, the pharmacist, had graduated from Harvard Law School in 1949. So it was always Harvard, Yale, or Princeton. The local Episcopal priest, Fred Bannerow, had graduated from Yale. And I had all these New Jersey cousins. So, and Princeton was in the air too, but we didn't have a family connection. But we had a family connection to Howard and to Harvard. And my father's first cousin's wife was the second woman in the history of Harvard to get a PhD in comparative literature. A Black woman. She got her in 1955. So they were like the mythic couple when I was growing up. The Gateses loved education, and they would point to this couple as Emmy going to Harvard. So I wrote to Exeter and said, I want to do a PG year, then apply to Harvard, or Yale, or Princeton. I only wanted to go to Harvard, Yale, or Princeton. And then I wanted to go to Oxford or Cambridge. Because by this time, smart people went to Harvard, Yale, or Princeton. I'm watching TV. And then some people, like Bill Bradley, gets a Rhodes Scholarship, and I knew that was for me. I wanted top drawer credential. And to my amazement, Exeter turned me down because I dropped out. So I had no choice but to go to Potomac State College. I was pre-med, straight A's. And then I applied to Yale, and I said, because remember, I'm a freshman in 1968, 69. What's happening? Affirmative action is coming to the Ivy League and everywhere else, right? And so I applied, and I said I'd repeat my freshman year. And I took the SAT. Nobody in Piedmont High School had ever taken the SAT. They took the ACT.
That was to get into the state school.
Yeah. And I took it. They had to arrange. I went to Allegheny High School, and I was the only one. I took it, and I did well. And Yale said, "You're in, and you don't have to repeat your."
So did you enter Yale as a sophomore?
I entered Yale as a sophomore.
I didn't know that.
I went straight into the sophomore. So to answer your question, everybody was proud of me, and I was going to Yale. But this is the color people, right? And I loved using that name. With my students, I tell them that if Frederick Douglass talked about being colored, I will say the word colored. You can't cancel me. I'm not woke. This is the way I'm a scholar. This is the way it is. Don't be trying that shit on me. And if you don't like it, get the hell out of my class. Usually people clap. And sometimes they get up and slam the door and leave. But when I hear the word color, I think of my mother and the smell of the kitchen, and that was the colored world that we grew up in. So, class of 66 at Yale had 6 black guys. The class that entered with me, the freshman class and transfers, 96 black kids. Why were there other transfers? Because Yale went co-ed. So women were transferring from the sister schools. So who greets me? Who became my immediate friend? Sheila Jackson Lee. Sheila Jackson. She transferred in. Sheila Jackson Lee, congresswoman from Houston, sadly recently succumbed to pancreatic cancer. Anthony Davis, Charles Davis' son, got the Pulitzer Prize for music, I think in 2020. Kurt Schmoke, who was a Rhodes Scholar.
He was the mayor of Baltimore, wasn't he?
First black mayor of Baltimore. He was the first black Rhodes Scholar.
Yeah.
And I was going to be the third, but I got a melon to go to Cambridge. Then Bill Farley, but the name's not important. And a pre-med guy, little nerdy guy, I always forget his name. He didn't really hang out, didn't like to go to parties. What's his name? Ben Carson.
Ben Carson. Ben. Wow.
Ben and Candy. I've known him for 50 years.
Wow.
All these people were like super people. And I remember I told my daddy, I said, Dad, I'm going up there to Yale. And that my life as a straight A student is over. So, but I said, but Daddy, he's looking at me. And I said, Daddy, but if I get all C's, that's like a C at Yale is like an A at Western University. And he looked at me and he said, boy, you think I'm stupid? And then you know what he said? It was the coolest thing. He said, all you got to do is do as well as you can do. And we'll be proud of you. And the one thing I want you to remember is if they don't treat you right, you come on home. And he told me that and I cried. They bought me a brand new car because they thought all the kids at Yale had brand new cars.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that I'll do tonight on the plane is watch the Detroit Lions. And for the last 4 years, the Lions have been my team because the principal owner is Sheila Ford Hamp. And Sheila and I were very close friends from Yale and in the same secret society. And she became the principal owner. Her father was Bill Ford. She's Henry's great-granddaughter. Yeah. And she turned the Lions around. And she said when we were in the secret society, it's like the eating clubs here, that's what she was going to do. And so I'm very loyal to her, and I'm going to go to the Bills game on the 15th, and I'll be rooting for them against the Packers tonight. So why do I mention that? Because I believe the only 2 people in all of Yale with cars were Sheila Ford and me.
I am so sad to have to bring
I'm sad too.
To an end, I will only do it if you agree to come back.
I will come back. I will come back.